There are an absolutely obscene amount of gear sets in the game at this point, well over 30 I believe, so I figured it would be useful for some newer players, especially mid-game players perhaps, or even older players or late-game players, to do a tier list of every single gear set that we currently have in the game as of October 13th, 2024. So we're going to be doing exactly that. I have every single gear set here in the game represented by a chest plate from the corresponding gear set, apart from Feral over here, which is represented by a weapon for one reason or another. Don't ask me questions. Let's go ahead and hop into this, though. The one thing I'm going to do as well is I'm going to update this to be F tier instead of D tier. So essentially we're going to have S, A, B, C, and F tiers for this tier list. S tier obviously is the best stuff that you want. It's exactly what you're going to need for the end game, late game, all that sort of good stuff. F tier being the stuff that you can basically just sell unless it's an extremely good piece. So let's go ahead and hop into it. Now, first of all, we're going to have the accuracy set. So the accuracy set is incredibly basic. It's a two-piece set that gives you plus 40 accuracy. So all things considered, accuracy is, of course, a reasonably useful stat to have, so this set could have some uses. It's going to go ahead and make it into the C tier, though, because there are simply sets that just do this role, but a little bit better, and we'll be actually talking about some of those later as well. So it is going to be in C tier. If you asked me maybe 2-3 years ago, it probably would have been A or S tier, but we've had so much power creep surrounding the gear sets, it's absolutely insane. And again, we'll talk about some comparisons or some alternative options later on. Next up, we have Fatal. Fatal is going to be crit rate plus 5% and attack plus 15%, and this is once again on a two-piece set. Now, this is kind of just like something like the attack set, or the offense set rather, paired with like a little bit of crit rate bonus. I have never built a single champion inside this gear set, and for that reason I'm probably going to go ahead and put it into F tier. There are just simply better sets available that will fill either roles. So there's going to be sets available that give you better crit rate bonuses, or sets available that give you better, attack bonuses. And by the time you're farming this gear and getting good levels of gear, you're probably going to have that stuff available as well, one of which we'll talk about fairly soon here too. So unfortunately, Fatal set is going to go ahead and earn its way into the F tier. Now next up, we have one of the OG sets once again here. This is going to be Avenging. This one has actually been buffed a little bit as well. It was reworked. So Avenging is a 4-piece set, which is kind of a bit of a downside these days, and it has a 45% chance to counterattack when receiving debuffs. So essentially, if you put this onto a champion that has an absolute blast of an A1 or an AoE stun, or something like that, maybe like a Marius for example, where he has an AoE Enfeeble on the A1, it could be very decent, because if they're trying to debuff you, you have a chance to counter attack that, right? Overall, we don't really see this used too many areas though, because there are essentially just better counter attack options. So you have the straight up counter attack buff as well as accessory pieces. That's one thing to mention too. So this is only talking about sets that are gear as well. So for example, reaction accessories and stuff like that will not be included on the list. But Avenging, I would say I'm probably going to go ahead and put into C tier. I don't think it really earns its way above that, and it certainly doesn't match into an F tier in my opinion, just because there are use cases for it. For what it does, there's not really a gear set that's going to do it better, if that makes sense. Next up, we are going on to Bloodthirst, which is crit rate plus 12, and you're going to heal by 30% of the damage dealt. So this is essentially just a lifesteal set, but on steroids. This particular one is, of course, farmed from the Doom Tower as well. So realistically, by the time you get to the Doom Tower, you're probably going to have better sets available at your disposal, which does definitely kind of hold this one back. In terms of a damage dealing set, though, it is very nice because it just gives you healing, and it just gives you, obviously, increased crit rate. So it can go on an HP nuker, a defense nuker, or an attack nuker, of course, which does give it a little bit more versatility. Because of that, I think it's probably going to go ahead and earn its way into the B tier. It's definitely better than the accuracy and the Avenging sets in my opinion, but it's certainly not an A or an S tier, right? So it's kind of a good mid-game piece, but you're probably not going to be using it on too many champions, especially into the later game. We have the Bolster set, which is a shield set. It's going to be a 4-piece set, and it does actually give you a protected shield, which is pretty incredible. So this is going to be a 30% HP shield. and it's going to go on for 3 turns. And it also means that the wearer is going to heal by 10% each turn. So this is very, very strong because you're getting essentially the shield set on its own, you're getting the immortal set built in, and then you're also getting it to be a protected buff. So it's very strong for your support champions. So for example, UDK, champions like Pythion, Duchess, anybody with large HP pools that you're trying to build out to help your team survive. This set is absolutely fantastic. It is definitely hard to get because it is a Forge Pass set, but for all intents and purposes, I think I'm going to go ahead and put it into S tier. If you have Bolster set, you're definitely going to be using it late game, and we do actually see it being used inside the arenas quite a bit as well. So if you're trying to be a PvP focused player, I think that's definitely going to be something that you're going to want to looking to get there. So next up, we have another OG set which has been power crept a little bit, and that's going to be Crit Damage. So Crit Damage is going to be a 2-piece set, and it just gives you plus 20% crit damage. Now, it is always nice to have 2-piece sets because you can kind of fit those in somewhere, right? So with like a Savage set or a Stone Skin set or something like that, you just have those extra 2 pieces on top, and it gives you a nice little stat bonus to boot. That being said, I do think it's probably going to go ahead and make its way into the C tier. Just having extra crit damage isn't necessarily enough to make a gear set good or worth it. There's better 2-piece sets out there, and we'll be talking about them fairly soon. Next up is the Critical Rate set. So I actually have my Raid account open on my phone, essentially, so I can look through and see what these sets are doing. The Critical Rate, I have 1 piece available on my entire account, which is a 6-star speed boot. The Critical Rate is a 2-piece set, and it gives you plus 12% crit rate. So it's essentially just, you know, a straight up crit rate boost. Because of that, I do think it's probably going to go into the same tier as something like the Crit Damage set. I don't really think you're going to be using it too much. It is readily available inside the dungeons though, so especially for, you know, mid-game players or early late game players, you might have pieces built up in reserve. You know what? We're actually going to go ahead. We're going to put it into F tier. Crit rate is just so incredibly easy to build on your champions that you're probably not going to need this set to do it. And once again, there's just so many better 2-piece options that we have available in today's meta. So if you're really sticking to this, and if you're really needing this piece to, you know, make or break your champions, you probably just have to farm for better gear overall. We have Cruel up next. Now, Cruel is a fantastic gear set. It is a 2-piece set that gives you plus 15% attack, as well as ignoring 5% of the enemy defense. Now, 5% might not sound like much, but if you pair this with Savage, which gives you a 25% defense ignore, you're ignoring 30% defense based on these. You combine that with something like a Sun Wukong's A2, which already ignores 50% of defense, you're ignoring 80% of the enemy's defense. Doesn't matter if they have increased defense buffs up or, you know, what their base stats are, just 80% of it is straight up ignored. This one is also from the Clan Boss. So essentially every day as you're farming Clan Boss, you're going to have a chance to get yourself pieces from this gear set. And of course, with how good it is and how readily available it is, it's going to be an absolutely fantastic set. So I am going to go ahead. It's going to be the second piece to join us in the S tier here, just because it is so incredibly strong, and we see it on basically every single damage dealer. Even still, it's one of the best 2-piece sets that you'll be able to have on basically any champion. The stealing damage, at least, of course, right? We have Curing Set, which is a 4-piece set, so it gives a 20% bonus heal, and the bonus heal restores destroyed HP. This one, very situational. In the situations where it works, though, it works very well. So essentially, if you put this on somebody like a Rekther Droth, it's going to increase her healing by 20%, essentially, and then that healing that gets increased, it's going to have it's going to restore destroyed max HP. So if you're running in the Hydra that's constantly destroying your max HP, or somewhere like that, you know, it can be very decent. Like I say, though, it's incredibly niche, just because there's not many areas that you're going to have destroyed max HP, and, you know, depending on the champions you're running, there are possibly better ways to do it. So, for example, Miracle Heal, as opposed to just depending on, you know, the gear set to do it. That being said, I think we're going to go ahead and put it into the C tier. It's definitely not bad enough to be placed into the F tier, of course, but I definitely don't think that it has enough use cases, and I don't think that players should be focusing on it as much that earns it really anywhere above that. So I think C tier is a very, very fair rating for it. Next up, we have the Cursed set, which used to be a pretty terrible set, in all honesty, and then it got a little bit of a rework. So essentially, it's a 4-piece set, and it has a 50% chance to place a Hex debuff for 2 turns. So essentially, with this, when you place that Hex out, what's going to happen is a percentage amount of damage is going to get spread onto any target with Hex on them. So if you do damage to this target over here, and then this guy has Hex, this guy is actually going to receive a percentage of your damage that you did to this guy over here, which is very, very cool. It's very strong, especially for Hydra. We're seeing it used so much in Hydra battles. You put it on somebody like a Krisk or an Eostrid or an Uko or somebody that's just doing obscene amounts of AoE attacks, and it's going to serve you very well. That being said, as it stands currently, and this is before the Hydra rework has come out, it is probably one of the most important gear sets that you can bring. So I am actually going to go ahead and place it into S tier for that particular reason. You might not realize how useful this account is until you don't have any of it, or rather this gear set is until you don't have any of it on your account. I actually don't have much for cursed gear on my account, so I can't make very strong builds because it used to be an Ice Golem, I believe, and I never really farmed it, so I just don't have those gear pieces, which is unfortunate. Very, very, very strong set, though, in my opinion. We have the Daze set, which is kind of the opposite in terms of strength. So it's a 4-piece set, which has a 25% chance to place a sleep. So first of all, bosses and a lot of minions are just completely immune to sleep, so it's not going to place. Sleeps are the worst crowd control debuff in the entire game. So sleeps, essentially they do make the enemy miss their turns, but they don't affect cooldowns. Whereas, for example, stuns, if your skills are on cooldown, it doesn't refresh that cooldown even when you take your turn. So that's, you know, way stronger. And sleeps, of course, if you hit somebody that's under a sleep, it essentially wakes them up and they get their turn as usual. So it doesn't really do anything. So that being said, it's also a very low chance to place, so 25% is not very good whatsoever, and then it being a 4-piece set is absolutely, you know, just ridiculous on top of that. So with all that considered, we're going to go ahead and we're going to place it into the F tier, and I think even that might be a little bit too good for it. If there was like an FF tier, that's probably where this set would go. It is just absolutely terrible. I'd highly recommend selling it unless, you know, you just have god tier pieces, right? Because you're definitely not going to be using it. I don't think I've ever built a champion out in an entire Daze set before. We have the defense set next. Defense set is an OG set, so it's a 2-piece set that gives you plus 15% defense. So this is it's pretty okay. There's definitely some gear sets that were added that have power crept it. It's very similar to, of course, like the HP sets and the accuracy sets and those sorts of things, where they're just sets that do it better, right? So it's definitely still very viable. It's farmable from from dungeons, so you're probably going to have a decent amount of it sitting around, unless you've intentionally sold it like I did on my account. We're going to go ahead and put it into the C tier, though, and as you can see, there's a lot of gear sets in the game, but it is also a very bottom-heavy tier list. So definitely, you know, it'd be cool to see some buffs to those old gear sets and those sorts of things, though I doubt we'll ever see that. Next up, we have the Defiant set, which is a 2-piece set, and this is one of those ones that has basically just directly gear crept something like defense. So it gives you plus 10% defense as well as minus 15% damage taken from enemy AoE attacks on a 2-piece gear set. This is absolutely incredible. This means that anybody that's doing AoEs against you, so whether that be an AoE clan boss hit, an AoE Hydra hit, or AoE PvP enemies, right, so other players, it's going to reduce their damage by 15% while also giving you 10% extra defense. Now, this gear set is kind of hard to get your hands on. I do believe it is a Forge Pass set. So there's a little bit of RNG there, of course, right? You can't consistently farm it. It doesn't have accessories with it, so you can't really use it in that regard. And it's just overall, you know, not many people are going to have very many pieces of it. Because of that, I think a fair place to rank it is going to be the A tier. So I do think it fits in very well here. I think a lot of people do use this for, you know, especially PvP content, but it's definitely not going to be one of the best sets out there, right? There are a few options that I would say do kind of the same thing, especially damage mitigation and whatnot. It's a very unique set, though, because there's not really anything that does it exact same role. So if you're looking for something to just kind of help your tank stay alive a little bit longer, it can be very solid. We have the Deflection set next, which is a 4-piece set, which gives you 20% HP, 20% defense, and a 25% chance to deflect one debuff onto the attacker. So this is worded a bit weird. Essentially, anytime that there's a debuff on you, especially if it's being placed and those sorts of things, that it has a chance to revert it back to whoever's hitting. So this is very useful for something like Bommel, for example, where it'll have a chance to revert those bombs back to Bommel himself, right? So it actually just takes the damage on himself, which is pretty cool. That being said, this is an extremely expensive material to craft. not material rather, but this is an extremely expensive gear set to craft, right? Like, it has some of the highest requirements inside the forge for the materials needed to craft it, essentially. So that being considered, as well as its effect, I think it'll go into B tier. We definitely do see some very niche use for it, but there's not really widespread use, and you're not really going to build anybody out in late game with it specifically, unless, of course, like you're doing those cheese strats like I mentioned with Bommel. The Destroy set is next on the list. So the Destroy set is going to destroy enemy max HP by 40% of damage dealt. I have exactly one champion built out in this set, which is a Vergis, who I use inside the Scarab boss to farm him solo. That is the only champion that I have built out inside this set, or the only champion that I use in this set. So it can be very, very useful for solo strategies on the particular boss inside Doom Tower. Apart from that, you're not really going to use it. For that reason, I think it's probably going to go into the C tier. It is incredibly niche. If we were talking only about Scarab sets, though, it would probably be S tier. But unfortunately, this is as it is in the game overall, right? So if the set is only used in one specific dungeon, and that one specific dungeon is not incredibly important, then it's probably not going to be a very good set. Next up, we have one of the Divine sets, which is actually going to be Divine... hold on, I'm trying to find the icon here. So this one's going to be Divine Crit Rate. So this set is going to give you a 15% HP self shield for 3 turns, as well as crit rate plus 12. So this is a 2-piece set, which is kind of the bonus with it. That being considered, though, so shields themselves aren't necessarily very strong, especially if it's a self HP shield. When you're building crit rate, more often than not, that's going to be for an attack-based nuker who's not going to have very high amounts of HP. So the main place you're going to use sets like this is to set up something like a Seer composition, in which case, again, it would be an S tier set. It's allowing you to bring an extra buff for Seer to rip off. That being said, in the game overall, I would say it's actually probably going to be in an F tier. I have exactly 0 champions built out inside this gear set, so that should kind of let you know how much late game players utilize it, I would say. We then have the Divine Life, which is definitely a little bit more useful. Divine Life is going to give you 15% HP, as well as a 15% HP self shield for 3 turns once again. So if you think about the champions that you're trying to build with HP, it makes sense that you're going to want a shield based off of their HP, right? So the Divine Life set is going to go into C tier. We don't see this used an incredible amount these days. If you're wanting a shield, you're basically going to be using a bolster or a shield set, right? So that it can be spread to everybody on the team. You're not necessarily just trying to get that self shield. Again, can be very good. It's an S tier for setting up Seer compositions, but apart from that, you're not really going to be using it anywhere. And once again, I have exactly 0 champions built inside this gear set. And lastly, we have Divine Offense, which is going to give you 15% attack and 15% self shield. So once again, champions you're building with attack, they're not going to have a whole lot of HP. You're not going to benefit a whole lot from having that self shield on them. Again, you could just bring in a champion that has bolster or something like that. So because of that reason, I'm going to go ahead and place it into the F tier. I don't really think there's too much else to be said about it. Lastly, with these whole self-shield things, we do have the Divine Speed. So Divine Speed is actually pretty damn good. It's essentially just a speed set with an upgrade. So it's going to give you 12% speed, as well as a 15% HP self-shield. I can't rag on this one too much, because I do still use my Arbiter in this set. And again, it'll be an S tier when you're setting up Seer teams and those sorts of things. I'm actually going to go ahead and throw it all the way up in A tier, just because getting extra speed on a 2-piece set is fantastic. You're going to be able to passively farm this from your arena resets, essentially. So over time, you're just going to acquire good pieces of gear for your account. And, you know, that's not really something that can be oversold, right? Like, just passively acquiring good gear is going to be a win kind of no matter what. We have Affinity Breaker next. So Affinity Breaker is a 4-piece set, which is going to have a 50% chance to change weak hits into a critical hit. This is extremely useful in a couple of niche areas. So for example, if you're trying to run your ninja on Sand Devil 25, some PvP builds can use it. That being said, though, since it is a 4-piece set, you're not really going to get the most benefit out of it inside PvP, just because there's, of course, you know, better sets that you can use. So with that being said, I think Affinity Breaker is probably going to go ahead and fall into either the B or the C tier, depending on how important it is to you. If we're talking specifically about, you know, just building a certain champion out in it for a certain area of the game, I think it'd be B tier. If we're talking about utilization overall, I think it's going to be C tier. The reason for that being is I have exactly one champion built out in this, which is of course my Ninja for Sand Devils 25. If I didn't have him built out in it, nobody would be using it. We have the set next that is actually from Baumel. So this is going to be the Fortitude set. Fortitude is going to be a 2-piece set, and it gives you HP, or rather resistance plus 40 and defense plus 10. These are pretty good stats, right? So having that increased defense, it basically just makes it the defense set, but a little bit stronger. Because of that, I am going to go ahead and throw it into B tier. You can definitely get some use case out of this for your tanks especially, right? So having defense and resistance on those champions are the two things that you definitely want. I do think it's a very solid gear set. I don't farm Baumel anywhere near enough to have decent gear pieces from it though, so I don't have much experience using it. That being said though, if you have spent more time farming it out, and if you have better gear that you can use it in, I think it would serve you pretty well. We have the Frenzy set. This is going to be a 4-piece set, which gives you plus 5% turn meter for each debuff received. This could be okay. Generally, though, you're going to want to just more err on the side of caution and just not be getting debuffs, so resisting them or blocking them, of course, right? So for that reason, I do think it is probably going to go into the F tier. It's a 4-piece set that doesn't really do too much crazy stuff for your account. I don't see anybody really using this most areas of the game. There's just better options out there, right, for PvE and PvP. PvE, you can basically just use block debuffs and you'll accomplish the same thing. So yeah, probably not really going to rate it too high in all honesty. We have Frostbite coming in, which is from, of course, the Frost Spider inside Doom Tower. This is a 2-piece set where each 2-piece set has a 15% chance to block freeze debuffs. And it also has a 10% chance to place a freeze debuff on the attacker. Now, I run my UDK in one set of this, so 2 pieces of this, and he is absolutely fantastic. Anytime he soaks up a hit from, you know, the single target nuker, support champions on the enemy team, those sorts of things, he has a chance to freeze them. And of course, it is a debuff placed by an artifact set, so it does not require accuracy, which means that they can't resist it, right? It can still be blocked. But an unresistible freeze on a 10% chance anytime you get hit is actually pretty incredible. This will be controversial, but I will actually go ahead and say that this set goes into S tier, really without question in my mind, because having the chance to CC when you're getting attacked is just so strong. And it's very hard to understate how useful that is. Even if you're just using this as like a 2-piece filler, right, to go ahead and place on like your nuker or something like that. Whenever you're hitting somebody, if you get frozen while you're hitting them, it is so frustrating, and you can easily get lapped because of it, especially if it's one of your stronger supports like a reviver or something like that that gets frozen, right? So very strong set in my opinion, and you will definitely get late game use out of it and even end game use in the arena. We have the Frost set next, which is going to be kind of the OG version of the Frostbite. So it's going to be a 4-piece set with a 20% chance to place a freeze debuff on the attacker. Now you might think this is going to be a very decent set as well. It's not. It's really not. The reason for that is it is a 4-piece set, right? So you need twice the amount of pieces to get a very similar effect to a Frostbite. And that being said, if you have 4 pieces of Frostbite, you're also going to have that 30% chance to block the freeze, I believe it would be, as opposed to just, you know, having the 20% chance to place the freeze. So the Frostbite is just strictly a better upgrade of it, or a better version of it. Because of that, the Frost set is going to go ahead and go into the F tier, and I think that is a very fair ranking for it. We have the Fury set next, where the damage increases as HP decreases. Now, there's no formula or anything like that that is presented to us. You can go look at some YouTubers out there who will break it down for you. But this set isn't very good. Generally, there's going to be very few champions inside the game that will benefit from it. So, for example, someone like a Leorius might benefit from it, but realistically the rest of the champions you're probably going to want to try and keep them at higher HPs anyways, so you're not necessarily banking on them benefiting from taking hits. Because of that, I think it's going to go ahead and go into the F tier as well. I have 0 champions built out inside this, and I don't think I ever will at any point in the future anyways, unless I'm doing some sort of like a niche showcase on like a Kytus or something like that. We have an absolute fantastic gear set next, so this is going to be Guardian, which you get from the Griffin inside the Doom Tower. So Guardian is a 4-piece set where the wearer absorbs 10% of all damage dealt to ally champions, so it's kind of like the Bulwark Mastery on steroids, and they're going to heal by 10% every turn. So you throw this on somebody like a UDK, you throw this on somebody like a Vogoth, champions like that, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Generally, you do want to pair it with that Bulwark Mastery, and especially if you can fit them into a stone skin or something like that with this as well. Absolutely insane. I'm going to go ahead and put it inside S tier in my professional opinion. It does definitely deserve to be there. The amount of damage mitigation it can bring for your team is absolutely insane, and it's going to definitely help to carry you through those City of Cintranos waves as well, where you might just not have the champions to get it done otherwise. Now we have the Immortal set next, which is probably one of the more famous sets inside the game, since this is going to help to solo a lot of content or just push areas that you might not be able to otherwise. The Immortal is a 2-piece set, which is going to also heal you by 3% each turn. Immortal is, of course, coming from the clan boss as well, so you're going to kind of passively get better pieces for it as it goes. And the drop rates are actually pretty decent once you get into the Ultra Nightmare as well. Immortal, definite S tier for me. I don't think it really deserves to be any lower than that. This has helped me push so much content, especially if you're talking like even live arena or those sorts of things. Just being able to heal by 3% each turn, as well as having that HP boost, is pretty important. You throw this on somebody like a Mithrala or something like that that doesn't have healing in their kit otherwise, and it can definitely help them to stay alive a lot longer than they would otherwise, which is very, very cool. We have the Immunity set next. So this is a 4-piece set, which is going to give us immunity for 2 turns. Now, this sounds very good, but essentially what it means is it's just going to place a block debuffs on you for 2 turns. So it is kind of okay, but again, with a lot of these sets, the older sets, they have been power crept. With this particular set, at least, it's not a protected immunity, right? So something like a Stone Skin's just going to be better, which we'll talk about later. I think immunity set is honestly going to go into the F tier for me. You're not really going to use it many places inside PvE. Generally, inside PvE, you'll just want to have a block debuffs champion instead. And then in PvE, in PvE, you're not going to use it much. PvP, you're going to have a, a champion that can just place better debuffs, or better buffs, rather. I can't talk, apparently. In both situations, you're not going to use it much because you have a champion that can place those buffs, the block debuffs buff, right? So, definitely a little bit confusing. Hope you got the idea there, though. It is in an F tier, and I certainly don't regret it. We have Impulse next. Impulse was very disappointing when it came out, but Plarium buffed it, and my god, is it good now. So Impulse is speed plus 12%, so just a regular speed set, plus a 12% chance to reduce a random skill cooldown by 1 turn. This is absolutely insane. If you have the 3 sets of this, it's a 36 speed increase and a 36% chance to reduce that cooldown. So it's essentially just a stronger version of Reflex. It is going to go ahead and make its way into S tier. If there was an SS tier, I think it would definitely make it in there as well. The only thing that you could really argue holds it back is the fact that it is, of course, coming from Live Arena, and you're not necessarily getting the best drop rates or anything like that, and it's a very tedious grind to farm those chests, but I think at the end of the day, it is definitely worth it. Next up is Instinct, which I do believe is another Forge Pass set. This one is going to have speed plus 12% and ignores 20% of the enemy defense, which sounds very good until you remember that this is a 4-piece set. Because of that, I think I'm going to go ahead and put it into B tier. It is a decent damage dealing set, but there are definitely better options out there for that today, some of which we'll be going over here momentarily. Not too much to say about it. I have no champions built out in it. It's not very exciting. Killstroke is up next. Killstroke is going to give you 20% crit damage as well as 5% speed. So it is essentially just going to be a straight upgrade to the crit damage set. Because of that, since crit damage is in C tier, we have to go ahead and put Killstroke into B tier. It's definitely not a piece that you're going to be using a ton, I would say, just since it is, fairly hard to get since it comes from the clan shop, and there's probably more important things for you to spend your clan shop gold on. So I don't think too many players will have good pieces of this laying around. If you do happen to, though, you can definitely get away with using it. I think it is, very viable in a lot of areas, certainly. Lethal set is next. Lethal comes from the Dark Fae inside Doom Tower. It's going to give you 10% crit rate and 25% defense ignoring on a 4-piece set, which is absolutely fantastic. Lethal is going to go into S tier without really a question. Being able to target farm, essentially an upgraded or a Savage set on steroids, is going to be absolutely incredible. And you can also, to some extent, control the pieces that you get inside the forge with your charms and whatnot, right? So it's very, very strong. It's a damage dealing set that I use on so many champions still. It is absolutely incredible. We have the Life set now. Life set is going to definitely be one of those older sets, which has certainly been power crept a little bit. Because of that, it definitely doesn't sit very high on the list. It is a 2-piece set that gives you plus 15% HP. I think I'll go ahead and place it into F tier. There's just better options out there, some of which we still have yet to talk about on this particular tier list, so I don't think you're really going to regret not using this one. Lifesteal is up now, so Lifesteal is kind of one of those OG keep your champions alive mechanics. So Lifesteal is essentially just going to heal you by 30% of the damage dealt. We did actually talk about the set earlier. Of course, it is essentially Lifesteal, but better. And so because of that, I don't think Lifesteal is going to rank very high. So we're actually going to go ahead and we're just going to place it into the F tier, kind of right where it belongs, I would say. Now, I'm just wondering to myself, here it is actually. So Bloodthirst is essentially the upgraded set for Lifesteal. If you have the option between the two, I think Bloodthirst is essentially just going to be the way to go without question. We do have the offense set, I believe it's called. I don't know because I don't actually have any of it on my account currently. It's going to be a 2-piece set though that gives you a plus 15% attack. It's going to go ahead and go straight into the F tier. So many better options out there. We have Perception. Perception, my god, was a game changer when it came out. It gives you plus 40% accuracy and a 5% speed boost, and that's going to be on a 2-piece set. Now, you can also get mythical variants of this, and you get this essentially from farming your faction wars. Absolutely fantastic piece. It's going to go into the S tier without a question. We have the Reflex set up, which is going to be very, very similar to the live arena set that we talked about earlier. Reflex is going to be a 4-piece set that's going to give you a 40% chance to reduce a random skills cooldown. This one, I'm actually going to go ahead and put into the A tier. If you can get good gear pieces from this, especially for some of your PvE damage dealers, so for example, Newts, Cold Hearts, any sort of champions like that, maybe like a Marius or something like that, it's going to be incredibly strong. And the fact that we do actually have accessories that can help damage dealing capabilities now and get those ignore defense effects, we can essentially use 4-piece main pieces like this, so it's definitely very, very good in my opinion. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the Immortal and how it helps you push content that you might not be able to otherwise. We have Regeneration next, which is a 4-piece set where it's going to heal you by 15% every single turn. So it's essentially like having a continuous heal on you at all times, which is pretty incredible. This one I'm going to go ahead and place into the B tier, I would say. It can help you push so many areas of the game. However, you're not necessarily going to use it late game, especially once you have champions that can just solo that content or those sorts of things. It does definitely still have use cases though, so I'd recommend having a good storage of it on hand with good HP stats and resistances and accuracies and all those sorts of things to help you out a little bit. Very, very solid set even in 2024. I'm going to switch it up here a little bit, so we're not going to go in direct order. We're going to go ahead and talk about the speed set. Speed set is still incredibly strong. It's a 2-piece set, 12% chance, or 12% increased speed rather. We are going to go ahead and place it into the A tier though. So there are definitely sets that do it better. For example, the one that we just talked about here earlier, it's the Instinct, I believe, not Instinct rather. I forget this one's name, but we talked about it. You can rewind. And Perception is arguably a little bit better than the speed set as well. And then of course, Divine Speed of course does it better. So I'm going to put Divine Speed essentially at the top of A tier. And then regular speed set would be kind of at the bottom of A tier there. We're going to go ahead, we're going to talk about Savage next. Savage is definitely an older set as far as all these go. It's been in the game forever. It's going to be a 4-piece set, which is going to have an ignore 25% of enemy defense. Very, very strong. It's definitely going to be similar to something like your lethal sets and those sorts of things. I would say it's probably going to go actually above the Instinct piece. The reason for that being, of course, is that you can actually farm it from Fire Knight. You can get mythical pieces fairly easily by farming Fire Knight hard, so it's very solid for that reason. Next up, we have the Resilience set, which is going to be a boost to your HP and to your defense. So it's similar to like a life set as well as a defense set, but you know, just bolstered. So it's going to be a 2-piece set, and it's going to be plus 10% HP, plus 10% defense. I'm going to go ahead and put this particular piece into probably, I would say, the B tier. There's a lot of areas that you're going to be able to use it very effectively. However, overall, you're not really going to be aiming to have this particular piece used on your champions, especially once you have better sets. So for example, like a bolster or something like that, where you can also get a secondary benefit from it in the way of like, you know, for example, a protected shield. We have the Toxic set coming up. Toxic set is going to be a 4-piece set, which has a 75% chance of placing a 2.5% poison. So the small version of a poison. This can be very useful if you're trying to solo something with, say, for example, like a Cornelia against the Iron Twins, a video that I showcased a while ago. It can be useful in those situations. Very, very niche use cases, though, so I am going to put it into the C tier. Late game especially, this isn't really going to be a gear set that you're trying to run on a lot of your champions. Relentless set is one that we're going to talk about now. Relentless is absolutely fantastic in terms of what it does. It's not so fantastic when it comes to talking about how you get it. So Relentless, I'm trying to find it on my phone here. It's a 4-piece set, which has an 18% chance to grant an extra turn, consecutive chances reduced by 45%. So essentially back in the day, you used to be able to proc it multiple times, just get like obscene strings of a certain champion going off. So they have actually added that reduced turn chance after the first time. That being said, this set on its own would be S tier. However, the way that you acquire it is essentially going to be by winning tournaments. So any sort of tournament events, you have to actually place in the top 2 generally to get pieces. Top 3 sometimes gets it. The third place usually gets like 5-star rare or something like that. So it's definitely not the best. Because of that, I think it's going to go ahead and go into A tier. Again, the actual effect of it is fantastic, but the actual viability of building your champions out with this and the availability of building your champions out with this are going to be really what sets it back. I would say the average player is going to have a very hard time getting any sort of like a competent or a competitive set built inside the Relentless gear. We have the Stun set, which is going to have an 18% chance to place a stun debuff on a 4-piece set. This is going to be very strong on any sort of AoE champions, and I think it does actually deserve to go into the B tier. It can definitely help you with crowd control as you're progressing through the game. As the later game rolls around there, you're going to have champions that can essentially just place stuns or steal turn meter, those sorts of things. Armanz is a perfect example of somebody who just does the stun set but better. Next on the list is Resistance. Resistance is another OG set that's definitely been power crept. It's going to have a 2-piece set and it's going to have Resistance plus 40. I'm actually going to go ahead and place this one probably into the F tier. There's a lot of sets that just do this role but better on your account. So if you have those options, I would say go ahead and use those instead. Retaliation is up. Retaliation is a 2-piece set which has a 15% chance to counterattack when hit, which is very solid. Not many people talk about this. I think it'll go ahead and make its way into probably the A tier. Having, for example, a nuker built out in this, so if somebody hits them right, that chance to counterattack. Having somebody like a UDK built out in this with some accuracy so that when he gets hit, when he's soaking up hits, he has a chance to counterattack and place a provoke on his A1. Very, very solid kit here, I would say, on this particular gear set. We have the shield set now, which is the OG version of Bolster, essentially. If you recall, Bolster is actually currently at least at the top of S tier there. So this is a 4-piece set, plus 30% ally shield for 3 turns. I am actually going to go ahead and place it into C tier. You can still get a lot of use out of it inside PvE, but for PvP it's basically all but dead because there's so many champions that steal buffs or take them off and those sorts of things. It's very hard to actually utilize this unless you have some sort of a protected version of it out there. So that's where your Bolster comes in. We have Stalwart coming in next. Stalwart is a 4-piece set, which is going to give you some damage mitigation. So it's a minus 30% damage taken from enemy AoE attacks. This one, much the same as the last piece, is going to go ahead and make its way into the C tier. There's better sets out there. We talked about Defiant earlier that made its way up into the A tier, right? So Defiant essentially is going to be Stalwart, but better. The only bonus to Stalwart, of course, is that you can actually farm it. So other players or more players can get very decent gear pieces from it. Whereas, for example, with Defiant, it might be a little bit harder to get those pieces. We have Swift Parry coming in. Swift Parry is a 4-piece set, which has speed plus 18%, crit damage plus 30%, and 50% chance of unkillable when hit with a fatal hit. So if you have a champion that is going to die, there's a 50% chance it gets the unkillable placed on them instead, or of course they won't die. This can only proc once, but if it doesn't proc on the first time they die, it can proc on the second. So it can happen once per battle, essentially, which is pretty cool. This one is very hard to get your hands on just because of the crafting requirements inside the Gear Forge. It was essentially a meta changer when it came out because it just absolutely, made so many champions just have a lot of RNG associated with their kit. So for example, running like Duchesses and Sifis in it back in the day was very, very strong. It has been power crept to the 9s though, so generally you'd want to run somebody in like a stone skin instead. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and put it into C tier. You can still get a lot of use out of it, especially in PvP, but it's just not what it used to be, certainly. We're getting close to the end of the OG sets here. We have the Provoke set, which is going to have a 30% chance to place a Provoke debuff. which is pretty decent. You could place this on somebody like, for example, a Vogoth who has an AoE, has a chance to place it, right? I do actually run a Provoke set on my Rockbreaker from the Dwarven faction for Faction Wars, because he's placing a counterattack on himself as well as a Provoke on the enemies, which is pretty cool. So use cases like that, it's not bad. Overall, I think it ends up inside C tier, though. You're not going to really be aiming to have this on your account or aiming to build champions in this. It's just kind of like a cool bonus set that'll come along once in a while. And we have Untouchable, which gives you an immunity for 2 turns and a resistance plus 40. So this is essentially just the immunity set, but, you know, cranked up a little bit. You get this one by farming the Scarab King, so it is a farmable set, which is nice. However, I just don't think the upgrade really makes it worth it, right? So the block debuffs that you get isn't protected. The extra resistance is nice, but again, this is a 4-piece set, so generally we're looking for something a little bit better. I am actually going to go ahead and place it into the F tier as well. I don't have a single champion built out in this, and I very much doubt anybody watching the video does either, so I think that's a very fair rating for it. We're coming to the second of the live arena gear sets. This is going to be Zeal. So Zeal gives you crit damage plus 20% and 3% extra damage for every 25% HP this champion has. So it's kind of the opposite of the set that we talked about earlier, where you gain HP as you, or gain damage as you lose HP. This one just gives you more damage for every HP you have. Could be very decent on someone like a Taurus or those sorts of things. Zeal, I'm probably going to go ahead and place into B tier. It's decent to have just because kind of a boost, right? It could be, you know, like a crit damage set for your absolute worst case scenario, but it does bring a little bit more to the table as well, which is pretty nice. We have Pinpoint coming in next. Pinpoint is a doozy of a set. So Pinpoint, essentially at 9 pieces, is going to give you 4 intercept stacks, which makes you immune to all CCs, including Polymorph. So this is absolutely insane. Pinpoint, I'm going to say, probably goes ahead and makes its way into S tier. It's definitely helping a lot of champions come out of the vaults. So for example, like your Ramentus, your Madame Ceres, those sorts of champions, right? Because it's essentially just helping to override the Polymorph blessing. And on top of that, it is farmable. So you can essentially just boot up some gear, or rather event dungeon there. You can go ahead and start farming for it. You can get mythicals of it. You can get accessories for it there. All that sort of good stuff. So it is a very, very solid set. Definitely happy Plarium introduced this one. It's very enjoyable. Slayer set comes next. So essentially at the 9-piece bonus with Slayer, you do have a 30% chance to deal additional AoE damage based on damage dealt by AoE skills. So essentially, you have a chance just to do like an extra burst of damage when you're doing AoEs, which is very cool. Because of that, I do think it's going to go into the A tier. It does have very good damage capabilities, but it's such an incredibly hard set to get, right? So you basically have to do the Forge Pass for it, I believe, or some very limited Deck of Fate events, essentially, is how we've been able to get this one so far. And because it's so gate-kept, I think a lot of players are really going to struggle to build viable kits with this, right? So it is very limiting in that way. If it was more readily available, I think it would definitely make its way into S tier, though. We're going to move to the Supersonic set next. So Supersonic, once you have it fully built out, it's going to have a 32% speed bonus at a 9-piece set. And it's also going to increase any fill turn meter effects cast by the wearer by 30%. So for example, think about your Arbiter placing her boost turn meters, Eostrid placing the boost turn meters, all those sorts of good things. I'm going to go ahead and place this one easily in the S tier. It is also farmable from City of Centranos, both on the normal and the hard variants. So it's very, very solid. Players are going to be able to accrue gear for this quite easily, especially if you're pushing through the City of Centranos. We have the Righteous set coming in. I've noticed a lot of people are kind of downers on this set for some reason. So essentially what it is 2 pieces, speed plus 10% and resistance plus 40. So it's essentially kind of like a perception set, but for resistance-based champions, right? So you're getting that extra speed. You're getting essentially the resistance built on top, so it's taking speed and combining it with a resist set. That being said, since Perception makes its way into S tier, I actually argue that Righteous has to make its way into S tier as well, because again, this is going to be the set that you want to use essentially on like a Siphi or somebody like that, right? Because it is giving you that higher speed bonus than a Perception, while also still giving you the plus 40 resistance. Now, resistance does scale a little bit worse, so generally you need to have about, I think it's 100 more resistance than the accuracy the enemy is trying to debuff you with. So that being said, you could argue that it should be plus 80 resistance or those sorts of things, but I do think the set is very viable as it is currently. I'm going to do Stone Skin next. So Stone Skin and Protection, the icons are exactly the same, just a slightly different color. Stone Skin We all know it by this point, I would say. So at a 9 piece, you're essentially going to have 2 turns of the Stone Skin where you can't receive buffs or take damage really, or those sorts of things. Rather, you can't receive debuffs. It's also going to give you a lot of resistance bonuses, as well as HP defense bonuses, and then a full 9 piece gives you an increased shield value from the Stone Skin. Stone Skin, it would be a genuine disservice to do it anything other than S tier. It absolutely deserves to be there. Right now, it is basically the meta in pretty much everywhere inside the game, right? Apart from, maybe like prolonged battles, so like Clan Boss or Hydra or something like that, but especially PvP, the entire meta essentially is just Stone Skin at this point and stacking up as many champions as you can in it. We have Protection. Protection is going to have a 75% chance to place a protected buff, and allies deal 5% more damage per buff placed by the wearer. That's on your full 9-piece set. Protection is actually going to go ahead and go into S tier in my opinion as well. Getting that damage increase on somebody who places a lot of debuffs, so let's think of like a Mithrala or something like that with the buffs she places. I said debuffs, I meant buffs. She's essentially going to give you a 10% damage boost to your team, which is absolutely fantastic. We are nearing the end here, which is quite nice because my throat's starting to hurt and I can't talk today apparently. So one of the last sets we have is Feral. Feral is one of the ones that was introduced with the new siege mechanic, so the clan versus clan essentially. At a full 9-piece, allies are going to deal 5% more damage per debuff placed by the wearer. At a 6-piece set, it does also give you a 50% chance to prevent the placement of sheep debuffs from the Polymorph Blessing. So it's essentially similar to a pinpoint set, except it doesn't just block it. It's a 50% chance, but this is going to be better for a prolonged battle. And then keep in mind that pinpoint is actually placing a buff on your champions, which can be removed or stolen. This Feral set essentially just gives you built-in resistance to Polymorph or a 50% chance to prevent it, right? So I do think it actually makes its way into S tier, especially because lots of players are going to be able to passively farm this. So when your clan versus clan is coming out and you guys are farming that, you're going to get good gear pieces from there. Might take a while, but you certainly will. The accessories for this are absolutely insane. 1 ring or 1 amulet is also going to give you 40 extra accuracy, which is incredible. So having just a few of the accessories laying around for your champions can be very strong as well. And lastly, finally, we're on to the Merciless set, which is the other set that was introduced along with Supersonic into the city of Centranos. So at a 9-piece bonus, it gives you a 15% chance of getting an extra turn. 6-piece is 35% ignore defense, and 4-piece is a 30% chance to decrease a random skill's cooldown by 1 turn when dealing damage. Obviously, there's some other benefits in there. You can feel free to read through it as well. This one, I think, is going to go ahead and make its way into the S tier. It is an absolutely fantastic set. Lots of people are going to be getting this one and farming this one. I do see that we have become top heavy here, right? So we do have a lot of gear sets inside the S tier, but I do definitely think they deserve to be there. That being said, if you have any disagreements or if you don't think I should have put something somewhere, feel free to let me know down in the comments. And as always, see you in the next video.